happy to welcome Candy Rivera Evans to be with us today. She was recently named Tri-Delta's Ritual Committee Chair for the 2020-2022 biennium. She's an alumna of our Alpha Alpha chapter at Adelphi University on Long Island, and she's served Tri-Delta in the roles of alumni advisor, recruitment specialist, program and conference facilitator, MPC area advisor, and a member of our inclusion advisory panel. So she's been a busy Tri-Delta for us in her alumni years. We're so proud that she has recently been named to the board of the Northeast Greek Leadership Association as well, representing the Greek industry overall, but also Tri-Delta. And professionally, she has been working in higher education and Greek life for more than a decade at the campus and headquarters level. She serves as the Assistant Director of Chapter Services for our Panhellenic Sisters at Sigma Sigma Sigma, and she's also worked for Phi Gamma Delta for Fiji at their headquarters, and at Lycoming College in Pennsylvania. So she's very immersed in the higher ed world and in the Greek world. We're so glad to have her here with us today to talk about her experiences and contributions to the efforts around diversity, equity, and inclusion. I can't wait to dig into all of this with her. Candy, welcome to our conversations on racism for Lead Now.
Thank you so much, Mindy. I'm happy to be here.
So I want to start off with these two new roles you've been given at NGLA on their board and as Tri-Delta's Ritual Chair. What are you most looking forward to with each of these roles?
I think with each position, it really allows me to bring myself as authentically as possible to the roles. I think that was part of what both organizations were looking for. And so being Greek from the Northeast and understanding that like unique experience of choosing to be Greek outside of that traditional residential live on 200 plus member experience. And I was excited that I didn't have to live in the Northeast to still give back to the Northeast and work with that region and serve that region because I'm currently in Kentucky because the passion to serve that specific demographic, that's really what was important to me. And they're just doing a lot of really cool things that I had gone to NGLA when I was a fraternity sorority advisor on campus. So I've seen that from, that lens, and now from the headquarters lens, moving into what I can do for the board and working on some special projects for the board. And this year especially is going to be really interesting because it's our first virtual program. And so that will be really exciting, not just for the Northeast, but at this point and this time in our lives, everyone can join that virtual experience. You don't even have to be from Northeast to
thanks for COVID.
Yeah, thanks COVID. And then getting the call about the ritual chair position, like that's just super exciting to me. As someone who personally never led ritual, I think outside of one, I think the senior ceremony, the circle degree ceremony for the Ohio Wesleyan women, I've never led ritual before. And so getting to continue the work of the previous biennium committees, initiatives that they were working on, like the pearl ceremony, and just creating more meaningful rituals, and how that is going to look a little different because they had to pivot and move things virtually and, in the middle of this pandemic. I think also continuing on the legacy of that committee and know that that's going to live on for years to come, and creating something that all of our sisters can be a part of. It's just a really exciting opportunity. So I'm honored and humbled to take on that chair position and work with this committee.
Yeah, I think it's such an interesting time for you to be in that position. And we were talking before, if you told us a year ago that we'd be doing ritual virtually right now, we would have all rolled our eyes and thought that's the craziest thing ever. But here we are. And I think it's really opened ritual back up for so many people as alums who don't get to experience that on a regular basis. They now get to be a part of that more regularly. And it's just made it more accessible to our chapters when we're in this virtual situation. So definitely exciting times for you there. We featured you in a Trident article a while back about our international sisters and how you came to the US as just a year old from El Salvador, and looking at the possibility of college and naturalization and growing up here only really ever having known America. What was that like growing up that way, and what perspective can you give us as somebody who came here from another country but also really just know growing up and living here?
Yeah. I think growing up and only ever knowing, life in America and the US, I didn't really think about it until I had to think about it, or until I had to actively think about it. So I remember my kindergarten teacher didn't know that I was bilingual until one day my mom came and picked me up after school and we were talking, and she was like, "Oh, I didn't know that Candy spoke 2 languages, like that she even had a second language, because I didn't have an accent." So she would have never known had she not caught my mom and I just talking to each other. And that was, I've always been able to kind of flip it. And admittedly, I wish my Spanish were, better, but I can definitely go in and out of conversation. That Spanglish is a real thing. Um, and I think that there are times in my life where I maybe hid a little bit of what made me me. And I'll use the example, my mom just came and visited over the weekend, spent a long weekend with me and my husband, and she made pastelitos, which are essentially little fried tortillas stuffed with ground beef, potatoes, and like vegetables. They're not unlike an empanada. But if she had ever asked me to bring that to school to eat for lunch, I would have been too embarrassed to do so when I was younger.
Yeah.
I remember begging her for peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, just because I just wanted to be like everyone else. And so being undocumented had its moments where I connected it with shame because I felt different and it wasn't necessarily my choice. I felt like I always had to blend in. I couldn't draw too much attention to myself because there could be follow-up questions, right? You don't want to stand out too much because then it'll call into question, my status. And I think now, wanting to blend in so badly and hiding those parts of me, like that's been a lifelong journey to embrace that. I think if you'd asked me years ago, I would have said it was a struggle, and now it's a journey. It is something that is a part of me. I cannot deny it. In fact, what has given me the strength to speak about it is being able to speak about it, is being able to find those people that understand and listen and hear me and see me. And that's a huge role of what Tri Delta does.
Do you find that now, like over the last few years, you felt more, was there a tipping point where you became more comfortable talking about it? Was it with age as you got older, or has there been a development in the last few years that's really made it okay to talk about it more?
I think I remember having a family interview with like immigration services when I was 13 years old, and they took my photo, and that ended up being the photo that they used when my like legal resident status came in, and I was 19 when that came in. So there was definitely a stark difference in it's not a green card, it was a cream colored card. And so that tells you how lengthy that process was. But I think once we got that notification, I felt like a sigh of relief, because I was able to then do, the same things everybody else could do. I was able to get my license finally, and, was able to work on campus, and it just impacted me. I got to cross off all of those, bucket list things that some of my peers had done earlier.
Yeah, I'm about a teenage girl in America who's dating and starting to drive and just going through the difficulty of being a teenage girl in America. And you've got this other layer of stress on top of that, and not being able to participate in things, and probably having to ask questions. Why don't you drive? Or why don't you do this? Or that must have been really difficult.
Yeah. I definitely had an inner circle that I think understood me a little bit more.
Yeah.
But still felt parts of me were hidden.
So I want to fast forward a little bit to the moment you became a citizen.
Yeah.
And I guess it happened through your first professional role, but talk about what that meant to you and how that felt to go from the 13-year-old who was interviewed by, the immigration service, and your picture was taken, and then you got your card 6 years later. I'm still holding on to that number of 6 years, like, wow. Yeah. And then how old were you when you became a citizen, and what was that like?
So I have to remember, I was 29 when I got my citizenship. I actually had started the process when I first went to grad school, and it was denied because I wasn't technically a resident of the state of Ohio. I still kept like my Ohio, because I was in school, so it's temporary. And so on this like technicality, I that was denied. And that was probably the saddest day of my whole life. I cried a lot that day. And so I wanted to take a little break and just kind of make sure that I was in a place where I was settled. If it was going to take another 6 years, I needed to know that I was in a place. And so I knew I was going to be in Pennsylvania for a while. And I will say that that process took 6 months. And I think that's just because there's not as many, you know, undocumented folks trying to gain their residency and their citizenship in central Pennsylvania. And they were, so it came from July to February. I was able to go through that process, studied for the exam, you know, did everything I needed to do. And because I was involved in the community, I was president of the Coming Young Professionals Association. They're like, oh, well, we know Candy. Like that's, and I was like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? But they asked me to do a speech at that naturalization ceremony, and my parents were able to be there, and you know, friends from work were able to be there for that. And then that afternoon, it was kind of a whirlwind morning, and then I hopped in a rental car and drove students to NGLA that same day. So it was just kind of all of my worlds colliding in like this great way. And I got to share that with students. They were super excited. They asked a lot of questions on the drive there. And it was, I think, one of the first times I was able to be open because it was all over. You know, I could breathe that final sigh of relief.
Finally. Well, I'm glad that you got that closure, that piece to put you into this next phase. And just glad you're a citizen of our country. Yeah. Tell me about your journey to Tri Delta. I know that you got involved with cheerleading and lacrosse when you first got to college, and then Tri Delta came a little bit later. What was that journey like of getting there and deciding you wanted to become part of the sisterhood?
So I will say the first woman I ever saw in Greek letters was a Tri Delta. And she did not fit the stereotype that I guess had been ingrained in me through media. And it kind of made me think like, maybe I can be a sorority girl. Like maybe that's something for me to think about. And then I noticed other student leaders that were involved that I kind of looked up to as a freshman were also Tri Deltas. But because it was deferred recruitment by the time that happened, I was really involved in these two sports. And what's really funny is that I just stumbled onto that lacrosse team. It was the first year they were going to be a Division II sport. So they just needed bodies. And I was like, well, what if this body doesn't know how to play lacrosse? And they were like, we'll teach you, it's fine. So I was able to do that. And then I also kind of was encouraged to try out for cheer. I found out later the captain at the time really just wanted to like play and braid and curl and brush my hair. So she was like, she'd be great. Like, I think that she could. And so they taught me everything. And that actually blossomed into, I coached for 6 years at Lycoming. And so that has given me a lifelong love of cheer as well. But when my sophomore year, when I no longer was playing lacrosse, I had more time on my hands. I got more involved. Still wasn't sure about Tri Delta. I had a friend, she kept pushing me to look into it. I was really concerned about the financial obligation to it because I didn't want to quit anything that I started. And so I was just like, if I have questions, I will ask. But at this point, I was like, you got to drop it right now. Like, I'm not sure if it's for me. And then the more that I hung out with her friends, we just started having these like weekly lunches. And then one day they all wore their letters. And I was just like, I feel like I'm missing out on something. I've already known that you were, a strong chapter. I knew that you didn't haze. I knew you got good grades and were involved. And like, I fit some of that criteria. Like, can I, at that point I asked if I had to wait until fall to join. I would have been fall of my junior year. And they said, no, we can see a BU now. And so that was the first kind of time that women are like, oh, you can just join if there's a vacancy. And so that was a learning experience for the chapter and for myself. And quite a whirlwind to the end of my sophomore year, but the best decision I've ever made.
And so you were still undocumented at that point.
Mm-hmm.
Did you ever was that ever a conversation inside Tri Delta? Did you ever face anything that made you feel uncomfortable? It sounds like you were surrounded by a great group of women that brought you in and were happy to have you there, and that wouldn't have been an issue. But I'm just wondering if that came up or if it
Actually, I think that it was right after we got the okay. Like, so basically, it was the first time I was able to travel to El Salvador to finish that paperwork, and I came back and I was a permanent resident. So I think that that also gave me the internal, okay, you can do this now, even though I know that it would have been fine if I had done it earlier. I don't think it was something we talked about as much. And actually, one of my littles ended up it was in a similar situation. We didn't chat about it until much later on in life. And I wish that if we had had that conversation earlier, we could have been there for each other a little bit more, and she wouldn't have felt alone through that process.
Right. That's interesting that you ended up with a little sis with the same,
Yeah.
but that's great. That's great.
Mhm.
So I want to get into a little bit of the Lead Now action plan and what TriDelta is doing to create a more equitable and inclusive member experience inside our organization. Realizing that while racism is not necessarily overt in our policies, it has taken place. It's taken a home in the organization in different places. What stands out the most to you about the Lead Now plan? And what are you most excited about in terms of the work we're going to be doing?
I think it's the fact that it just we have it written out. We've done the work. We're ready to kind of move forward. I think before, and I think back to like the inclusion advisory panel, the conversations that we had. It was, well, some chapters are ready and some chapters aren't quite. So, we can't tiptoe around those uncomfortable conversations anymore. We just have to own the fact that not everyone's going to be ready, but it's time. Simply put, because it's the time to do the work. We can't pretend that we don't have certain practices in place that prohibit, access to membership. We can't pretend that we don't have women that once they're initiated are impacted by their sense of belonging when they're asked to like straighten their hair or, buy a certain outfit to do that, or feel pressure to go on spring break because everybody else is going on spring break. And those are the conversations that we need to tackle. And through, I think, the Lead Now plan, that's where we're kind of setting some of that standards across the board for all of our chapters to kind of, we can no longer meet them where they're at. We all need to just own the fact that we can do things differently. And we need to talk about the big issues and not just wait for, a policy to come down or things like that, to be more proactive in that conversation. And I think I've been able to address that with like body image facilitation over the years. I think that has really been a powerful conversation since kindness is at the heart of what we do. And it has to be more than just a pretty slogan. It requires every individual to think about the role that they play and, being comfortable with the uncomfortable.
The uncomfortableness, I think, is a big part of this. Our collegiates are foursquare in the middle of it, and having those conversations on a regular basis. And I think from an alumni perspective, the same thing needs to happen. We need to move into some of those more uncomfortable spaces and have those conversations as we look to expand our base. You just were named a committee chair for TriDelta. We've named people to our board. We've named Sisters of Color to now all three of our boards. I've talked to a lot of people about that representation matters, but it also matters in the work that they do and bringing different perspectives and lived experience. What's your best advice as to how we can expand the Sisters of Color and the diversity within our volunteers in TriDelta? How do we bring more women into these roles and into the conversations that are happening that shape our organization?
Okay, yeah. I think that this Lead Now especially has given me a lot of time to reflect on what my experience was as a collegiate, and to know then what I know now and be able to share like that whole truth with everyone in undergrad instead of just parts of it. I think it begins with creating an environment where everyone is able to ask those deep questions and really get to know one another on that like truly sisterly level and really embody what that means. I think connecting with those alum that maybe have lost touch or, lost just kind of that connection, whether, it's an email that is out of use and we need to reach out to some, to sisters. I think it comes from within. I think during quarantine, I reached out to some sisters I haven't talked to in a while, and we started these like weekly Zooms to just catch up with one another. And to expand on that, I think that's where we just need to continue with the human connection and just catching up with one another. Not because we've been bored at home for 6 months, because we genuinely want to know how everyone's doing and, how are you and what we can do. And so I think that would be a way to kind of create that reconnection with Tri Delta again. Because it has to come from a sister that is already involved, that already kind of knows to bring her back into the fold, to let her know these are all the things that maybe a little different than when it was when we were, actives. And so here's what we're doing now. Would you like to be a part of this? Essentially again.
It's funny. We have commented so many times that, Zoom and Ring Central, these platforms to have these conversations, were around way before COVID. And we could have been doing this kind of connection a lot earlier. I love that it's been accelerated by COVID and given us a new way to connect, even though we're not in person. But I think it will stay. I'm hoping it will stay around for a while, and that we can use these to keep those connections strong and bring people back into the fold and close to the sisterhood. How do you think ritual can sort of be a catalyst for us uniting inside our sisterhood?
Okay. I think ritual is what bonds us all. It's the oath that we took and that we were, we promised to uphold not just once, but every day for a lifetime. And so I don't think we talk about it enough. I'm lucky in the fact that I've gotten to work with fraternity and sorority leaders for, the majority of my life post undergrad. So it's in front of mind for me all of the time, but I don't know if other alumni or even just like my chapter sisters are thinking about our ritual on a day-to-day basis like I am, because I don't think we talk about it enough. But imagine if we did, and that ritual week, though we have it's not the same as like, let's say polish week. Like everyone expects you to come back a week early before school starts, and we're talking about recruitment 24/7, but nobody's going to come back a week early to talk about ritual. But what if we did? And so that's kind of what I think would be really unique. And so we don't map out our programming based on the ritual, but it'd be really cool if we did. And so I used to ask my students all the time, like, what would you do if we got rid of all the policies and procedures that you're used to doing? Like, how would you know what to do? What would you plan? How would you conduct yourselves? Like, where would you go to look for guidance? And they would always be like, that's a trick question. That would never happen. I'm like, well, yeah, but I'm asking you to think outside the box. Like, where would you go for that? And they're, they would kind of be like, is it the advisors, the alumni? And then finally a quiet voice would always be like, I think it's the ritual. And it was like questioning it. And so that's the answer. It's the common thread across countries, state lines, religious and political beliefs, because we all chose Tri Delta and Tri Delta chose us back. So like, how do we continue to make her proud every day and live our purpose and truly be kind of like to all?
I'm glad you said that as we enter this election season. There are lots of diverse views inside Tri Delta, but ritual is that one thing that unites us in how we act and how we respond and how we live out the Tri Delta values that we all share. So I'm glad you brought that up. One last question before we get sort of close out. What can people be doing to educate themselves right now? I know you're inside of the Greek community and you've been inside higher ed. If we think about this as a growth exercise, what do you think people can be doing to educate and grow themselves right now during this time?
Yeah, I think it has to come from a genuine place of care and concern for others' well-beings. It's really easy to share like a list of reading, recommendations or podcasts or, posts that you've donated to a worthy cause. But are we doing that to appear woke, or are we doing that because it's the right thing to do? It's what we should be doing, because it's the human thing to do. I think it starts with reflection, right? Like asking yourself, where am I playing a role in this? I think it brought to light a lot of things that, you know, individuals, chapters, communities. I'm even thinking of like Abolish Greek Life, like that was part of, that's all come to the forefront now. And so I think that there are so many different ways that you can look to better yourself, to learn more about the conversation, to read articles. I think that all has to come from within and not just feel like you feel like you have to, but because you want to, because it's the kind thing to do. And I think that starts with personal reflection. That being said, the Lead Now website like has amazing resources, so you don't have to, you know, come up with it all by yourself. Like, here are all of these groups that have come together and have kind of created this content so that you can just start the journey. You don't have to read all of it. You don't have to listen to everything, but like, you have to start somewhere because it's what you want to do.
Yeah, thanks for bringing the website. We just updated it for Hispanic Heritage Month to reflect our Latinx community and allow people to learn more about that. And we're always updating that page so that people have great resources to go to. So thanks for, it's Lead Now, tridelta.org/lead now, with 3 Ds, of course. Well, I want to thank you so much for sharing your personal story and your thoughts on Lead Now and where we are as a sisterhood and, you know, sort of a world at this point in time. I know people would love to follow you and find you on social media or wherever. So where can people find out more information about you or start to follow you?
Sure. Definitely LinkedIn. I'm under Candy Rivera Evans. I'd love to connect with you through there. My social media, my Instagram is Candy Nails Life. And so that's just all, no underscore or anything like that. I'm also on Facebook. I would love to hear from women that have questions about the ritual. If you are, you know, having ideas for Ritual Week or just planning things already, please reach out and let me know. I'm sure the committee will be happy to hear from the sisterhood.
Awesome. Thank you so much for being with us today. Good luck this biennium. I was going to say this year, but this 2 years in your role as ritual chair. We're so glad to have you volunteering and just as a sister.
Thank you so much.